If you show up and you're trying to sell to an organization, you haven't bothered to look at their website and understand what their mission is and their values and their vision, you're wasting their time. I would have vendors come to me and they didn't bother looking at my website. It's like, well, our strategic priorities for the last 8 years are on my website. You didn't even bother looking at it. You're wasting the time.
What if navigating change didn't have to feel like chaos, but could actually be a calling? This week on Seek, Go, Create, the Leadership Journey, I'm joined by Brad Englert, author, advisor, and former Chief Information Officer at the University of Texas at Austin, big school. With decades of leadership experience at both Accenture and in higher education, Brad shares hard-earned wisdom on leading large-scale transformation, aligning IT with mission, and how faith quietly informed his professional path. His new book, Spheres of Influence, is a blueprint for anyone called to lead with clarity and purpose in complex environments. If you're a leader facing change, uncertainty, or high-stakes decision-making, this conversation is for you. Brad, welcome to Seek, Go, Create.
Thanks for inviting me.
Great to have you here, man. You got so many exciting things on your resume and within your book, but let's get started here, and why don't you pick? Would you rather answer, what do you do, or who are you?
Well, I'm going to go with the who are you, because it's really different than the last 40 years of my career. And I retired from Accenture. Most partners retired at 50, so I was ready to go. And then 2 years later, the university called me and they wanted some help with an IT strategy and hour-a-week pro bono, so they didn't even pay me until 3 months later, and then I was half-time, 6 months later, full-time. And I was there for 7 years as Chief Information Officer. But now, after I retired the second time, I really wanted to help people grow in their careers. I enjoyed that through my 40 years. It was part of the culture at Accenture was to grow your people, and I actually looked back at 22 years of annual reviews, and I looked at how my partners helped me become a partner. And, they did a really good job giving me stretch roles and things like that. So I had all these stories, and I thought, and I'm still mentoring 2 or 3 people a year, but, that doesn't scale, and I can't clone myself. And so I thought, well, I'll just write a book. And so I got together with my publisher, and the editor was terrific. She says, just inventory all your stories. And I came up with like 40 to 50 stories. And then we just sat at a whiteboard and looked at how can we organize these. They fell into relationships, business relationships, and there was boss, direct reports, executive leaders, all your staff, and those are your relationship closest to you. And then there was customers, peers and influencers, and strategic vendor partners. And the stories just fell into those categories. And she was really good. She says, don't write one page until you have the full outline. Well, you don't build a house without a blueprint. You don't write a program without a design. Yeah. And since the book has come out, I've created a couple of workshops. Just did one this week, a 1-hour workshop. And there are a lot of young people there who are early in their career, and I just wanted to help them learn the secret of the importance of investing in relationships. And, people talk about networking all the time, and, to me, it's superficial and transactional. In 40 years, I've never been to a networking event where I got a customer out of it. And I had one fellow, I had his business card. A week later, he's calling to ask me to donate to his not-for-profit. So I don't even know who you are. That would be a no. A lot of people who are my vintage are giving it to their adult children so they can, because they don't teach this in business school. And so I've just really enjoyed helping people grow.
Is this kind of a mission for you now at this stage of your life?
Yeah, it really is. I've been successful. I've been fortunate, very fortunate to have really good mentors over the years. And It's a way to pay it forward.
That's good. So what's interesting is that sometimes relationship people aren't considered technical and technical people aren't considered
Mm.
relational. And
Hmm.
so tell me, it seems as if I'm sitting here talking to a guy that CIO, technical background, whatever. We're going to go over a little bit of background in just a moment because I got some questions from kind of way back. But I mean, are you a relationship guy or a technical guy or both? Or where do you lean?
Well, probably lean more on the relationship side. I had to learn enough of the technology so I could translate to my customers or my executives. I did a lot of translation at the university. They're brilliant PhDs who are deans and presidents, but they don't know technology. And so I try to use simple words to convey some complex terms. But I had to learn how to program. I had to learn how to design programs. I had to learn how to manage programmers and designers. And the technology changes over the years, but the principles are really the same.
For those that might be listening in, y'all heard him say 40 years in business, and the audience knows I'm in my early 60s. I'm guessing you're in your 60s. Is that accurate? Right?
I will be 70 in June.
Congratulations. So that's coming up. That actually might be right around the time this releases. So we'll consider
Excellent.
this a birthday celebration for you.
Excellent.
So one of the things that I had a conversation recently with some clients that I'm working with, and we were talking about some generational differences that we're noticing in the workplace. And some of it is related to communications styles, and some of it is related to work ethic. Some of it was related to decision making. Both of us we were quick decision makers, and we were noticing some passivity in some younger generations we were dealing with. You mentioned that you've got people you interact with that are giving this book to their adult children. Talk about just some generational stuff. Some of these things, I mean, I'm reading through and I'm going, yeah, that's right. But some of this stuff could be new for people. They've never heard it. So just let's start having conversations around the generational differences in some of these items.
Well, certainly at the university, I had 330 people in my organization, and all the way from student workers to people who were ready to retire and been at the university for 40 years. So I had to deal with all levels. And I found that there are really three principles that I tried to follow in all those relationships, including my students, which was understand their goals and aspirations. What's your major? What do you want to do? And what kind of work do you want to do? I would have interns working for me who I would help them get an internship somewhere aligned with their work. Second is setting and managing expectations. I was bad at it early in my career. I got much better at it later in my career. But two phrases came up in the book. One is if you're a manager, people are not mind readers, so you need to use your words. And then the other phrase is if you're a direct report and you need something from the manager, you need to use your words. And so I tried to be very clear on when I asked someone to do something that I would discuss, when does it need to be done? What's reasonable? What does it look like? And not just quickly say, oh, go do this and have them flounder. And then the third principle is genuinely caring about their success. I would spend time walking the halls. I call it management by stumbling around. And I would talk to people. I would walk through the help desk area where all the students are. You can be very popular when you bring a bunch of donuts to the help desk area or pizza. They're always starving just to get to know what are people trying to achieve. I had someone a direct report. I said, do you want to be a CIO someday or you want to be a technical person? They said, well, I really enjoy the technical work. I said, well, great, we need you. And then another woman wanted to be a CIO. I said, well, when I go on vacation, I'm going to put you in charge and see how you like it. So just taking the time to ask people, what are they trying to achieve? Who doesn't want to share that? And then being good about if you can help them, help them. And if not, sometimes you know someone who can help them. So you don't have to help everybody.
I think in the book you said something to the effect, I may be getting this wrong, but you something that communication is a duty. Basically, it's part of our duty to do that. I'm not sure that everyone looks at that. And that could be something that might be slightly generational, even though I notice that in a lot of arenas, people aren't really proactive when it comes to communication. How has your approach to communication changed over your career? And maybe even especially during challenging seasons. I actually think that challenging seasons is when we learn what we're made of. But just give maybe you mentioned that you were better at it later, so a few things later. Let's go ahead and talk about maybe when you weren't so good, because I think that helps the listener, because they're probably sitting here going, man, I'm not where Brad is. Yeah. What are some of the challenges you've dealt with there?
Well, saying yes to everything. I was really bad about canceling vacations and working too much. And, I loved what I did. So part of it was self-perpetuating. But when I was a manager, I found a book called Managing Expectations that was written by a psychologist who applied her psychological insights to IT world. And it could be at any organization, really. And one of her techniques was just say, whoa. Not say no, just say whoa. And literally the next day, my type A personality boss, she calls me up at 5 o'clock. I'm trying to leave to have dinner with my wife. And I need a white paper. And it just sounded really urgent. And I was scared, but I said, whoa. And I said, when do you need this white paper? Oh, let me check my calendar. I need it in 2 weeks. Okay. How many pages do you want this white paper to be? 3. I was thinking 10. Do you have an example of a white paper? Oh, yeah, ask David. I did one XYZ Corp 10 years ago. Well, guess what? I went home and had dinner with my wife. Now, before I learned to say whoa, I would have called her, canceled dinner, upsetting her and me. I would have stayed up all night, written a 10-page white paper, and delivered it the next day and get yelled at. This is not what I want. And it's like lose, lose, lose. And just by being clear and creating some mental space and time to really understand. You say you're a quick decision maker. People like my management style because I'm more of a plotter. And so they'd come in with these problems and they wanted to rush to the solution. And I said, well, it took us 40 years to get this way. Let's understand what the problem is. One of my techniques was intentional foot dragging, where I didn't rush to the decision and I would drag my feet. I had a boss who didn't want me to buy bottled water for my staff. Now, we were in buildings that were built in 1930s and 40s, lead pipes. I had one building where there was sediment in the glass when my staff would do it. So I wanted to buy their water. It was not that expensive, but he was a CFO and they're penny pinchers. A peer of mine wouldn't buy water for his staff. They wanted to drag me down to the lowest common denominator, even cut the water in my office and the coffee. So I brought my own water and coffee for 7 years. But I basically ignored the boss for years. Then the new boss shows up. He goes, what's this water thing? And he stopped it. I dragged my feet for 7 years.
I wonder if actually, when you mentioned that you're a professional foot dragger, I almost saw that you might need to trademark that. That actually could be a good leadership or management approach. And it is real interesting. I often will move quickly and I have to force myself to slow down for the people, really for my spiritual walk. Mm-hmm. As I interact with the Lord, and sometimes on prayer time, the Lord says, would you just slow down a little bit? And but before we get too far into here, Brad, I want to back up because I like to understand kind of how I like to understand their journey. And as you're sitting here, for those watching the video, I think over your left shoulder, you've got some books on Australia. And I read somewhere, I think this was correct, that you were a high school teacher in Australia.
That's correct. I was an exchange student in Australia, and I was there when I was 17 years old. And then after I graduated undergraduate, I went back to the same school and taught for a year and a half. And it was really fun because the students knew I knew what they knew. So even though I was a Yank,
You were one day ahead of them.
they knew where things were happening. So I've been back with the family probably every 5 years or so. One year I was back, I said to my Australian mom, I'm the chief information officer at the University of Texas at Austin. She looked at me and said, I didn't think you're that smart. I said, I wasn't when I was 17. But I went to college and then I went to graduate school.
Wow. So you went over there as an exchange student, and then later you went back. What part of Australia were you in?
Just north of Sydney, about 100 miles, is a valley called the Hunter River Valley, known for their red wines. This was a rural town called Maitland, which is a lot of agriculture. It's all built up now.
I've been to that wine country. I've been about 9 months in Australia and New Zealand. Is the reason I'm asking.
Nice.
We had some friends and we went up to that wine country, and I think we spent the night up there somewhere. Australia is a beautiful place.
Beautiful.
What are some things, either from the cultural experience or the teaching experience, that you learned during that season of your life that you've kind of taken with you for the rest of your life? Some things you got from that experience.
Well, I think that's where my desire to help people started. It's as you're a teacher, I had ninth grade all boys. Well, how do you keep them from tearing the room apart? And I was teaching science. And then I had, 11th grade girls and boys, English and history. But the younger guys, I had to really engage them. And, I was teaching science. And I remember one guy came up to me at lunch, on the playground. He goes, what's going to happen in science today? And I said, I'm not going to tell you. You have to wait. But just, to see people grow and, there's a direct correlation with how hard you work as a teacher to how well your students do. And I could see that every day.
You mentioned in your principles earlier, you talked about genuinely caring for people. Have you always had that? Is it something that's developed over time? I know you've got a faith component to your life also. Where has that come from, or has it just been a build? Or give some background on that. So where do you think that came from? Your genuine caring for other people?
My parents.
Tell me more.
They were really good about looking out for people in our church, taking care of the people who didn't have what we had, and kind of teaching me early on to be more sensitive to the fact that we were lucky. Not everyone is that lucky, so be sensitive to that.
Did you grow up, I guess, in a church environment, and so
Yeah,
faith was always a foundation of your life?
Yeah, United Church of Christ.
And did I see from the Midwest, I know we'll talk about your role at University of Texas soon, but I know you spent a lot of time in and around that Austin area. You're still there, but I think I saw Midwest. Where are you originally from? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up outside of Chicago, a suburb, Crystal Lake, Illinois. It was a small town, probably 10,000 people. Now it's, of course, all built up. And then my undergraduate school is Shimer College, which is at the time, a small rural campus in Mount Carroll, Illinois. And really, when I got to finish up my teaching in Australia, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school. Literally put a map of the U.S. out on the kitchen table and said, okay, I don't want to be cold anymore. So I'm going somewhere south of the Mason-Dixon line. Been to Austin before. I've been to Florida, and I thought, well, Florida's a little too humid for me, so I'll go to Austin, and that's how I ended up here.
So you went to Austin. Austin kind of became your home. Now, at some point, you moved into that, I'll call it the consulting role. That's the Accenture. It probably, was it Accenture when you started that? Because
No,
there's been
I
some changes
joined
there.
Arthur. It was Arthur Anderson, which became Anderson Consulting, which became Accenture. When I started, there were 40,000 consultants worldwide in Arthur Anderson. Accenture now has 700,000 people.
And
Just
at one
on.
point, when I came out of Georgia Tech, there was the big seven firms,
Hmm.
and I'm pretty sure there's been some slicing and dicing. And are there three now, four? What?
I think four.
Yeah. So Accenture, big operation. You started out there. I don't want to dwell a lot on this. I want to get to some of these spheres of influence that we're going to
Mm.
talk about. But what I really love to do is gather some pros and cons, things you really gathered from those years and that experience, and maybe some things you left behind and didn't take with you. So tell me a little bit about those Accenture years and some of the things you got. The good thing about being in that consulting role is you see, I think you get a glimpse at a lot of different scenarios,
A
correct?
lot of different scenarios and a lot of similar scenarios. So, my practice area was primarily government and higher education. And my clients were University of Illinois, Ohio State, Michigan, Columbia, Vanderbilt, Cal State, Texas A&M. So the big publics, big privates. And most of those were 1 or 2 year transformational projects. So my years at Ohio State really prepared me for being at the University of Texas at Austin as a CIO because they hired me to be the Ohio State leader of the transformation project. So I was actually the client, which was really great because then I could tell the Accenture partner, I want Christy here on Monday. And she go, oh, I can't do that. I see the same report you see. I want Christy here on Monday. And was able to assemble a dream team. But I learned, especially at the university, of what it's like on the customer side of the desk. And, I dealt with some vendors who, some were very transactional. They didn't care about us. The one vendor showed up once a year to get their check, which was always 10% more than the prior year. And these software we're using was the learning management system, which is what 54,000 students use, 4,000 faculty. In fact, well, they thought we were too big and it cost too much to transition to another solution. Well, the trouble was the students hated the software. It was a 1990s look and feel.
And technically,
Um,
they were the customer, right? I mean, this is something that I think gets watered
that's
down
right.
in those environments. Is these are people coming for education, and it seems like I remember when I was at Georgia Tech, I didn't really feel like a customer very often, but,
Yeah. Well,
but I was the customer, sorta, right?
yeah, absolutely. When I got to the university, I met with this professor who'd been there for 40 years. He was an electrical engineer, kind of a crusty fellow. I'd worked with him 15 years prior in a statewide network project that was successful. And I said, okay, give me some advice. He goes, get out of the office and tell people you give a damn. And that was the best advice because I then would meet with my peers across the university every 4 to 6 weeks and just check in, always with an agenda. And my peers, who were my peers, the vice president for public safety. Well, it wasn't if something would go wrong, it's when it would go wrong, and how do we work together to make sure we keep people safe. The provost for curriculum, it's her and her office that helped me select the new solution. So when we took the solution to the president, he said, well, what do the students and faculty think? Well, they selected it. They unanimously endorsed this decision. He said, well, let's do it. Each of these projects took 2 years to implement because we're so big. It's like an aircraft carrier. You got to turn it miles from the port. And we changed all the phones, 21,000 phones to voice over IP. We changed out email systems. We had custom built email system that was 18 years old. We replaced it with UT branded Gmail, faculty and staff box for file sharing. So over 8 years, we moved as much as we could to the cloud, including HR payroll. So in March 2020, my successor increased the VPN, increased the Zoom, and 70,000 people went online to do teaching, learning, research, and work.
That time frame seems significant. That time frame seems significant.
Yeah. But if I had stayed in my office, I wouldn't have known she was in pain trying to change this intractable system, and then got her support and her team's support to implement over 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, this email came across. It was to the president, and she and I were copied on it. It's like, oh, I'm going to get fired. And it was the most heartfelt, warming email. It was from all the department leads complimenting her team and mine that we helped them over 2 years make the transition. And because it was such a better product, it was a natural pull. But they said something like, this sounds like an arcane IT project, but it wasn't. This is the lifeblood of the university. And they thanked us for not only being helpful, but working with the vendor to change things to make it better. The vendor ended up selling to all the Research One universities like us, so they knew it was important. The senior vice president for sales would call me once a month just to see how things were going. My other vendor, when we finally fired them, never even saw it coming. They were so clueless. And we had a big celebration, invited the department leads and my staff and her staff. We have a bowling alley on campus, so we had bowling and pizza, and actually had a cake with a tombstone shape that had the rest in peace for the old product.
That's a good tale of two cities there. It's the best of times and then kind of the worst of times there.
That's right.
Coming head to head. You mentioned something at Accenture, you work with higher education, but you also worked with government. What are some things that you could share? There might be things you can't, but what are some things that you could share about the type work you did with government? Because there's something that's been nagging at me about government things that I'm going to follow up with, but tell me a little bit more about what you did with government entities.
Probably what I enjoyed the most was helping them with strategic planning. It's kind of a dirty little secret that people don't have a strategic plan. And so often they would reach out and ask for our help to plan. I had one agency, it was a retirement agency, and the executive director was retiring. He wanted to leave it in good hands to the next executive director. So we reviewed all the agency, came up with recommendations, and then a plan for how to move forward. And I thought, that's really good stewardship. And we had one university system, 15 campuses, 250,000 students. We went to all the campuses and created an IT strategy. And the number one priority was the network. The network in Texas, in West Texas, they were swinging lanterns to get the network to work. And the second priority was they wanted library materials available through the network, a digital library. And this is in the 90s. And third was distance education. To the credit of the board, they funded the network, and then they funded the digital library. So 15 years later, I'm at the University of Texas at Austin. One of the things the faculty loved was the digital library that we had implemented 15 years prior.
Yeah, that's cool. I guess the reason I was going there, but it doesn't sound like you did a lot of work at the federal level. It tapered off, but early part of this year, we're recording this in late May, I guess, of 2025. People are probably going to be able to listen to it in June or something. This whole DOGE government efficiency thing is going on, and I'm a strategic guy also. Mm-hmm. And as an industrial and systems engineer, I love talking about efficiency, effectiveness, and all that. And I've been sort of enjoying what's going on, but I haven't gotten enough information on it. And I was just wondering, Do you really think that government can be effective and efficient? Sounds like you've done that at some of the state and local levels. Do you think we could do that at the federal level?
Well, I actually worked for the federal government for 5 years. I came to Austin. I needed a job. And so I started work at the IRS as a tax examiner.
Oh, boy.
And, we had production quotas. We had, if you didn't meet your quota, you got fired. So this was early 80s. And then I became the payroll officer. And when I became the payroll officer, we were automating from punch cards to online data entry. And this is really how I got into IT in the first place. I was the user, I was the customer. And I said to the programmer, I want the screens to default 2 weeks with all eights. So if someone has perfect attendance, they just hit enter instead of typing 8888 6,000 times twice a month. And we had 6,000 employees. And the guy had a short sleeve white shirt, skinny black tie, big thick black glasses, and yes, a plastic pencil protector. And he said, no, I can't do it. So he scurried off, and he scurried back the next week and go, okay, I can do it. So he's taught to say no to anything I ask for, and then ask the boss. If the boss cleared it, then he could come back and do it. And that's actually why I needed to get some technical skills, so I didn't have a guy like that hold me hostage for the rest of my career. And that's what attracted me to Arthur Andersen, which had a 3-year training program.
That's interesting. So that was a good experience working in the federal government level?
Well, they were good because it was a union shop, and it was an 8-hour day, and that was it. And I was going to grad school 3 years part-time, working full-time, grad school part-time. They would allow me to use my vacation to take classes at Tuesday at 2 p.m. And I was at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. Wilbur Cohen was the HEW secretary. Ray Marshall was a labor secretary. Barbara Jordan was a congresswoman who was on faculty. Well, I could go to their classes even though they're in the middle of the day. So they were helpful in getting me where I needed to get to.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'm intrigued by what might be going on because we know government can keep getting bigger and bigger. And so I'm hopeful that maybe we'll see more efficiencies. Maybe they need more people like you in there. I'm not sure about Elon Musk. He's slicing and dicing and all, but not quite the strategy, but sometimes you might have to move, right?
I've never been a fan of fire ready aim. You have to plan it out.
Yeah, I think.
I'm confident. I've seen where that retirement agency, we had a recommendation of how they could manage their cash better. And it came from the woman in charge of cash management. And I gave her all the credit, but they basically paid our fees with implementing that one recommendation.
Right. Well, very good. I want to go over to the thing that was interesting to me about the book. As an author myself, I'm always intrigued by titles, but subtitles seem to mean more to me. And I'm sure when you're working with your publisher, y'all are having these conversations about you got to grab people with the title. To me, subtitles tell me more about what the book is really about. So your subtitle is How to Create and Nurture Authentic Business Relationships. And what's interesting is up at the top there of the, to me, that's more the title, but we have to come up with these catchy, flashy titles and stuff like that. I'm going to pick apart some of these words and I want you to tell me a little bit more about them. I want to designate, first of all, how we define an authentic. That's a word we throw around a good bit in our culture today. How do you define that?
It's a relationship where it's mutually beneficial and you're helping each other. And it's something that lasts over years and sometimes decades. So a good example is I had a really good client I worked on 3 or 4 successful projects with. 15 years later, she calls me out of the blue, and we're talking. It's like we hadn't stopped working together. That's your litmus test. And she goes, you remember my son, Bryce? I said, yeah, I met him when he was 5 years old. Well, he's an attorney now, and he wants to apply for a job at the university. Would you talk with him? And it's like, Of course I will. Not a problem. I talked to him and I said, okay, Bryce, all the lawyers in higher ed talk to each other. Find that organization and you'll know all the issues. So when I had a contract with Google, I got the contract for University of California at Berkeley. I didn't start from scratch. My lawyers reached out to them. And so
Yeah,
it's just being mutually beneficial.
one thing I've observed that a little bit in that, and I also oversee some sales organizations and people that are constantly churning through relationships. To
Yeah,
me, that like a
very
lot of hard
costly.
work. Yeah, every day you wake up, it's a brand new day. I got to go out and earn new business today. As
Right.
opposed to, as someone almost 70, I'm guessing you've had the cumulative effect in authentic relationships in your life, correct?
So Accenture has about an 80% client retention rate. People love to be successful, so they reach out. If you're successful with a client, they're going to come back and ask you to help again. There are metrics about, if you have an 80% retention versus 50%, I mean, you can put numbers to that. There was a sales team that had a 50% churn rate. I met with their manager, and his salespeople didn't know any of the customers. And they didn't know why it was important to know any of their customers. And so he kicked him in the rear end and said, get out and talk to people. So I think, um, success breeds success. And people, if you have a trusting relationship, then that will continue.
Well, the trusting relationship, but also it goes back to that one of those third principles. You actually care about the success of others
Yeah.
or care. And I've even maybe making it even more succinct. You just care about others versus everybody you look at, I joke about it at times, has a dollar sign on their forehead. And I think that's where some people go through a churn because everything is transactional. And
Yeah.
I do think maybe like a foundation of what you're talking about is that heart level, truly caring about other people.
People can sense that. I mean, that's where you get authenticity. If you show up and you're trying to sell to an organization, you haven't bothered to look at their website and understand what their mission is and their values and their vision, you're wasting their time. I would have vendors come to me and they didn't bother looking at my website. It's like, well, our strategic priorities for the last 8 years are on my website. You didn't even bother looking at it. So you're wasting my time.
Yeah, and we're really describing maybe 80 or 90% of everyone who reaches out to me on LinkedIn because I've got some things in my bio that are very attractive to, I guess, people that want to connect with you and then immediately try to sell you something in my inbox. And I'm just going,
Yeah.
you could tell it's auto. And I'm going, that's not the type person I want to deal
No.
with. And you brought up something earlier. You said the reason that, there's such a high retention rate, I guess, at Accenture is that they help people be successful. But I also think people want to be successful, but they don't want to be around jerks. I mean, even if we're achieving some degree of business success, I still want to feel good when I go home at the end of the day, right?
Right. One of my best clients was a large research university in the Midwest, and they were great leaders. The CFO, provost, and president were from the beginning. It's hard to change everyone's payroll and accounting. It sounds boring, but it affects everybody. But they, from the beginning, were so supportive, and they would say to the campus, there are going to be problems in the future. We're going to get through them. Just hang with us. It's not a failure. It's just these things are hard. And when I first interviewed with them, I was having lunch with the provost and the CFO, and I said, you have all the things you need to be successful. I'd love to come help you. This was in October. I said, but next June, I have a vacation planned to Australia. And I was supposed to go last year, but I had to cancel it because of business. So my wife and I have already bought the plane tickets. We had the passports for us and the boys. I need to go for 3 weeks, you know. And they said, oh, sure, that's fine. And so started working with them. And in March, we hit our first big milestone. We're meeting with the president, CFO, and provost, and we're giving them an update. And Mr. President, I want to remind you, as I did the last 3 months, that in June, I'm going to be going to Australia on vacation. And his hand started shaking. It's just like I'm slow motioning, canceling my vacation. Whoa! And the CFO goes, and provost both said, wait, Brad, hold on. Mr. President, when Brad joined us in October, he talked about this vacation. It's important to him and his family. We should uphold our commitment. Diane's going to be in charge. He's confident she'll be fine. We should let him go. And so my client defended my vacation, which was awesome. And 10 years later, my wife and I are back in that city, and we had dinner with the CFO and his spouse. We talked about that situation. He goes, Brad, when you were gone, we were scared to death. But that's the quality of people. Even though they're scared to death, they trusted me and upheld their commitment. That mutual accountability is part of an authentic relationship.
Right, and the other two words that I just wanted to ask you about is, the title said how to create and nurture. Mm. So what do you want to say about those two words, create and nurture? Because we joked earlier about the networking events, the ones where you put your coat and tie on and you grab you a boatload of business cards that we might be dating ourselves, because I'm not sure people carry around business cards like we used to.
Actually,
some do. They're digital, on their phones and stuff.
Yeah.
And they go out to these events where they spear people and all of that. But just, whatever you want to say here about creating and nurturing those relationships.
Yeah. Well, let's start with create. You need to be strategic and intentional with the relationships you're trying to build. So you don't have to build relationships with everybody. Yeah, your boss is obvious. Your direct reports is obvious. With customers, less obvious. So you need to look at your customer base and prioritize who are your best customers. Who do you want to work with? And then some customers you don't want to work with. I'm not the believer in the customer's always right. Same thing with vendors. I was spending tens of millions of dollars a year on network gear and all sorts of stuff. Well, I got to know my strategic vendors and ask for a mutually beneficial relationship. So the creating part is first be strategic and intentional of who you're going to build a relationship with. And there was a chief financial officer in a large organization. His chief of staff, who's been there 30 years, had the trust of everyone in the organization, and she and I helped with the transformation project. I went to another similar size organization, talked to the chief of staff of the CFO, and she literally said, I've only been here a year. I'm not very influential. I'm working on dinky little projects. You shouldn't waste your time talking to me, which was awesome. So be intentional of who you want to work with. And this is something I coached my direct reports. Nurture is getting in front of people in a consistent manner. So just put it on your calendar. I had on my calendar, meet with the VP of Public Safety every month, always in his office, so I could walk across campus and see people and see his team. And always have an agenda that you send out before the meeting, because that's when you can make sure you're thinking ahead about, every year I was irritating someone, changing their phone or email, so you get ahead of it and tell people what's coming. And then they were good at sharing feedback with me. How my staff doing? The vice president for facilities, we had a terrible relationship with, because we were bad partners. And so when I got there, I apologized for all the bad behavior in the past and said, I want to be your best partner. We're building a $32 million data center. I want to be your best partner on this. And we worked to do that. But every month I'm in their office talking about things. And then I asked my staff, my direct reports, to meet with their peers across campus. 7 to 10 people every month or every 6 weeks, depending on how closely you work with them. And this woman who worked for me reminded me of this story. She read the manuscript, said, you didn't put my story in there. I said, what story? When you demanded that I go out and meet with this manager who hated us. Oh yeah, I remember that. And you said you'd rather have us in the tent than outside the tent. So she went out and met with this person. They hated us because of past transgressions, not being truthful, not doing what we said we were going to do. So we apologized for all the past transgressions and said we really want to get better. And as we got more customer-oriented, more proactive, that person could see us improve over months. And after about 8 or 9 months, she became an advocate for us. Well, that wouldn't have happened if my direct report was hiding in her office, hiding behind a screen. That's the nurturing part.
It is. That's good. Thanks for clarifying those two. That kind of triggered something in me when you talk about apologizing. One of the things in the book you emphasize is, I think the word humility is a leadership trait. I think it's something that maybe we all as leaders have to work on. And again, the root of humility, I think, is that caring for others, love for others. But how can a leader remain humble without compromising the confidence that they need to share, or even clarity of vision, and maybe even decisiveness that we talked about earlier? What are some ways that that leader can remain humble, especially as they're elevated in organizations?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are kind of two types of leaders. There's the imperious leader who you need to come to them and supplicate, and they are the smartest people in the room in their view. Very one-way direction. They don't care about you. I was always trying to be the humble practitioner who is a team player. I want to be the coach. I want to coach the team so that the team's successful, I'm successful. And so I think just leaning on the expertise of your staff, leaning on the expertise of people at the university, and there are a lot of really smart people there. So when we were trying to pick software to encrypt laptops, I had the IT directors help me pick the software. And it's bringing the best minds to bear on these topics, not me being in the ivory tower just announcing things.
I found it, this is kind of what helps, this is kind of what I heard you say. I think it relates to my theory. It's kind of admitting that you don't know everything and that you need other people.
That's right.
And I think in our world, sometimes we see leadership examples that maybe don't portray that, and we think that might be success, maybe all the way up to our political offices, especially at the higher ups at times. And I like that humility. My theory is that if you do not live out humility, it'll be forced upon you.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and you mentioned apologizing. We have 250,000 devices hooked to the network every day. What could possibly go wrong? Something will go wrong. So my approach was, it's not if something will go wrong, but what do we do when it goes wrong, and how do we keep it from happening again? And we became much more transparent on, sorry about that outage, here's what happened, this will keep it from happening again, please forgive us. And some people hang on to these things for years. I had someone who was mad about a transgression 15 years prior, and I literally just went to him and said, I'm sorry that happened, it's inappropriate, can you please let it go? So you just have to be open and honest about it.
Yeah, I think all of that's good. Brad, one of the things in the book you did is you kind of laid out, I believe it was 10. I'm actually going, just thumbing back here to the comments. Wasn't there 10 areas that you addressed? Was that correct?
For
the sphere, well, you've got part one, the internal sphere of influence, discuss
right,
that, and then
which is
external.
your boss, direct reports, executive leaders, and staff. And then
Right.
external is customers, peers, and influencers, and strategic vendor partners.
Right, exactly. In looking back, this is the trick question to authors that put a lot of their time, energy, and effort into a book. If there's anything that you would want to add to it now looking back, what might that be? Anything you would be like, you know what, this is maybe something I've observed or learned since, or it's the rest of the story or anything like that? And I know that's a tough question for an author to say, this is something that else. Maybe it's your next book. I don't know.
No, I think I'm one and done.
you're like a one and done. You're like these guys that play college ball for one season and they're done. Huh?
That's right.
Anything back on it?
I was really pleased with my editor. It took me 5 years. So we started before the pandemic, and then pandemic hit, and she had a young son. It's like, look, I'll call you in a year or two. But I thought about it every day because I had the full outline. I had a direction. And then what the publisher did, which I'm sure you had the same experience, is it went through at least 3 substantial edits. And each editor had a different angle to it. I had one say, well, Brad, I'm sure you feel better after writing that story, but I don't think it adds to the book. Why don't you take that one out? And he was right. It's like, that was kind of inappropriate. But I felt better writing it. But I think that allowed me to, and I was able to share the manuscript with a lot of people who worked with me at Accenture and the university, and they all brought up different angles and things. So nothing pops into my head at the moment.
Who would you say the book is for? Define the audience that you really, either you were writing it to them, because sometimes when we're writing, we've got someone or some type person in mind, or what you've observed as it's been released are gaining a lot of benefit from it.
Yeah, I designed it for people who want to be in the C-suite someday. They're managers. I got a lot of feedback from middle managers because no one ever talks to them, managing up and down. I had a lot of positive feedback from middle managers. And people in the C-suite, they said, geez, I wish I had read this 30 years ago. I could have used some of these ideas. On Amazon, it's a bestseller in 3 categories: leadership training, mentoring and coaching, and customer relations. Those were my target areas, so I feel good about that.
Well, tell us where people can find, and I know Amazon, obviously that's a place they can go get the book, but I believe you got a place people can connect with you and maybe read a sample of it. So give us all that info now, and I got one more quick question before we wrap up.
I'm going to send you a customized link to my website that's tied to your podcast. It will send your listeners to a free sample of the book, how to buy the book, and how to schedule time on my calendar.
Very good. And is that your personal website? Go ahead and give what you can.
www.bradenglert.com.
Perfect. And I think you said maybe you'll do a /SeekGoCreate.
Yes.
For those that might be listening and don't have the visual and the links that we'll include, we'll do that. And make sure, I'd love for people to connect and get the book or connect with you. I know that there'll be people that'll really resonate with your style and personality. Brad, you got one more quick tip that maybe we didn't cover that might help people? There's the book again, Spheres of Influence, that just might help them just before we wrap up and I finish this up here. Just something quick.
Yeah, back to my professor. Get out from behind your screen, get out of your office, and go tell people you care.
That is a great tip. Brad Englert, thank you. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for taking your extensive career that spanned from Chicago to Australia to all over and writing this book, Spheres of Influence. I'm holding it up for those that might be on YouTube. It might be a little fuzzy there. And again, I love the subtitle, How to Create and Nurture Authentic Business Relationships. We'll have a link down below, or you could jump on Amazon. And I appreciate you, Brad. Thank you all for listening in. This is Seek, Go, Create. We've got new episodes every Monday. And I am so thankful for all the comments and everything that we keep seeing over on YouTube. YouTube's really growing right now, and I appreciate that. Love what's going on with all the podcast channels. Thank you for all of that, and just keep listening and sharing, and we will see everyone next week on Seek, Go, Create. Hey, before you go, I want to leave you with a challenge. If you're enjoying the conversations here on Seek, Go, Create, I think you'll love the deeper journey my novel Coach, A Story of Success Redefined, takes you on. It's a story that's moved many of my readers to rethink what success actually means and how to live a life aligned with faith, purpose, and peace. Pick up your copy today wherever you buy books or at timwinders.com and begin the journey for yourself. Thanks again for listening. And as always, keep seeking, keep going, and keep creating.